Tonight's debate between Trump and Biden could be seen by 70 million Americans, or maybe even more, perhaps the best chance to sway hearts and minds before Election Day. So what could this all mean when you take a look at the electoral map? Well, Andrew's back with that.
Well, Rich, we've noted how many times just how stable this race is and has been. Joe Biden has a 6 to 9 point lead nationally and is comfortably ahead in the race to 270 electoral votes. But not everyone sees the race as being quite that one-sided right now. The election forecasters at the University of Virginia, among the best in the business, are one of the experts that has Biden short of 270 electoral votes right now, though they do have him at 269. Their forecast has Arizona, Wisconsin, North Carolina, and Florida as the only toss-up states, though poll averages show Biden with leads in all four. It also gives Ohio, Iowa, Texas, and Georgia to Trump, though polls are close in all four of those states. Of course, the impact of what the candidates say tonight depends in part on how important the issue they're speaking about is to voters. Nationally, the economy is the top issue, with the virus, healthcare, racial issues, crime, and the Supreme Court all bunched together in the minds of voters. The economy is also the number one issue in Pennsylvania, but Trump only has a 1-point edge on it when voters are asked to pick a candidate. Biden enjoys larger leads on every other issue of importance. Next door in Ohio, the economy is an even bigger issue, and voters there give Trump a 7-point edge on it. Law and order is number 2 in Ohio. Both men are tied. Biden leads on other issues polled, including the virus response. Then again, maybe there just aren't that many persuadable voters left out there. An NBC News Wall Street Journal poll shows 71% of voters say the debates will either be not important or will only be just somewhat important as they make their decisions for president. For more, we turn to Kyle Kondik. Kyle is the managing editor of Sabato's Crystal Ball at the University of Virginia's Center for Politics. First of all, Kyle, if you could give our viewers a primer in how different forecasters come to different forecasts and how you make specific decisions within them. For example, in your forecast, you have 4 states, Arizona, Wisconsin, Florida, and North Carolina, that are toss-ups. But we've seen Biden seems to be leading in just about every poll average in those 4 states.
Yeah, look, there are a lot of different forecasts out there. You know, there are some like 538 and the economists that do basically quantitative forecasts where they kind of create a model and they put the polls into it and sort of spits out a projection. What we do, and what I guess the Cook Political Report, Inside Elections, and others sort of similar to us, it's more qualitative projections in that we're not necessarily building a model. We look at models and we look at all sorts of different information, but ultimately the ratings that we provide are based on our own best judgment as to where we think the states are. In the case of those 4 toss-up states, we feel like they're close enough that we're not confident necessarily in leaning them one way or the other, but those are assessments, of course, that will be constantly reevaluating.
So given that, and given the way that your map looks, how could the map potentially change tonight if either Biden or Trump has a very good night, or if one or the other has a really bad night?
What we've seen from polling, and also I just think through the trends of this election, is that the electorate is pretty locked in. I mean, you can go back to before the pandemic and look at the numbers and look at them now, and I think you could say broadly that the numbers are better for Biden, but they're not overwhelmingly better for Biden. This is not an electorate that's jumping around a lot. There's not a lot of undecideds. There are not a lot of people saying they're going to vote for third parties and then ultimately coming home to the major parties. In other words, it's different than 2016 in that regard. The electorate's more stable. And so whatever ends up happening in the debate, I think our default position should be that the debate probably won't change all that much. Now, granted, there could always be some sort of kind of outrageous moment that really stands out and sort of snowballs in coverage and maybe has some sort of impact on the race. But you know, at the moment, I think if you look at the toss-up states and even some of the states that are kind of leaning Republican, or where we're giving Trump the benefit of the doubt, you know, those states are all closer than the states we're currently leaning to Biden. And I think particularly if you look at like a Wisconsin or Arizona, those are places where I think Trump really needs to make up some ground, or those are states that are going to slip away from him. I think Florida and North Carolina, probably if you look at the numbers, are maybe legitimately closer to being 50-50, but really, you know, Iowa, Ohio, Georgia, you know, these are all states that Trump won by 5 to 10 points in 2016, where things also appear to be pretty close.
General consensus seems to be that Biden has the riskier play tonight, that he could theoretically do more harm to his campaign in the debate if he has a poor performance than Trump could. I'm curious if you agree with that general thinking.
Well, look, if you're the candidate who's going to the debates leading, I think the debates are inherently riskier to you just because you already have the lead. Whereas for the president, I think the debates offer an opportunity to try to catch up to Biden. You know, the conventions sometimes serve that purpose as well, and they're an important mile marker on the road to November. And yet, I don't think you can look at the conventions and say that they really changed much of anything. So I guess I agree that in the sense that the debates may be riskier for Biden because he's the one with the lead, and therefore he can potentially squander that lead. But also, I think Biden would be perfectly happy if he got through the 3 debates and basically they had no impact, because that would mean he would come out of them with the same kind of lead he has now, which is, I think, is a good lead. It's not an overwhelming lead, but he's in a decent position.
Looking at the polls when it comes to specific issues, and while COVID and the response to the coronavirus is an important issue, it's not number one really in any poll. A little surprising considering that it's impacted every single American and every single American state. Did that surprise you at all, especially considering that there have been outbreaks in swing states like Florida, North Carolina, and Arizona?
It does surprise me a little bit, although I do think that Americans, I think we sort of get used to changed circumstances, and also that the public kind of has a short memory. So even though we're still in the midst of COVID, some voters have moved on to other things. I also think sometimes voters' opinions about what the top issues are may sort of be colored by who they're actually supporting for president. So for supporters of the president, maybe they don't want to think about COVID as a top issue because they think that that's an issue that hurts the president. And maybe they're likely to cite the economy, which is an issue where the president has greater standing. Likewise with Democrats, they may feel similarly about emphasizing COVID because that's an issue where the president, relatively speaking, is weak.
In the past, voters would split tickets. They would vote for one party for president, vote for another for the Senate or for lower races. We don't see that quite as much these days. Key Senate races in Arizona, North Carolina, Iowa, 2 of them in Georgia. Even in Montana, the Republican senator seems to be underperforming the president. How important is the presidential race to these Senate races? And is Donald Trump something of a weight on Republicans running for the Senate?
We're in an era where there's less ticket splitting than there used to be, although I think we can sometimes get caught up or we can sometimes overstate how little ticket splitting there will be. In 2016, it was the first time in the history of popular elections to the Senate, which goes back about 100 years, in which every state that had a Senate race voted the same way for president, for Senate. However, if you drill down into some of those 2016 results, you see that the top line results for president, for Senate usually look pretty similar. But if you look at kind of the granular data, like in a state like Pennsylvania, the Democratic or the Republican Senator Pat Toomey did a lot better in the Philadelphia suburbs than Donald Trump did. However, the Democratic candidate did a lot better than Clinton in sort of more small town, rural areas of the state with ancestral Democratic voters. So there are going to be ticket splitters. I think what we have seen is that there are a lot of Republican senators in sort of slightly Republican-leaning states who are running behind the president. Tom Tillis usually doing worse than Trump in North Carolina, Martha McSally in Arizona, Joni Ernst in Iowa, Lindsey Graham in South Carolina, Steve Daines in Montana. And I guess you might expect at the end of the day for the presidential race and the Senate race to converge, but it's not guaranteed to, and there are voters who are going to split their tickets.
I want to end with an unusual question for you, Kyle, and this is just based on anecdotal information, but the sense that I'm getting is a lot of Americans think this election is going to end in one form of chaos or another. Is there any sense that voters might pick a candidate whose election would mean less chaos? I mean, is that a theory that you're hearing being discussed anywhere? Should it be a theory that's being discussed somewhere?
Well, look, I mean, I've heard from people on both sides of the aisle about this. The Trump campaign is sort of trying to make the argument that if Trump is reelected, it would somehow lead to less protests, and that Biden's America would be racked by protests. Now, granted, we've got a lot of protests going on while Trump is president right now. I think that one of the sort of conceits of the sort of implicit arguments of the Biden campaign is that, hey, I represent sort of a return to normalcy, basically, to borrow the famous phrase from the 1920 Warren Harding campaign, that Biden will help, reduce the level of chaos. Now, I do think we're in sort of a very divisive, chaotic time in American politics. But I think for some voters, even some traditional Republican voters who maybe like the Republican Party of the Bush family or Mitt Romney more than they like the Republican Party of Trump, they may feel like they can bite the bullet and vote for Joe Biden this time because they feel like Biden would at least be a more stable personality in the White House than Trump is. And I do think that there are some of those kinds of voters out there.
Kyle Kondik is with the University of Virginia's Center for Politics, among the best in the business when it comes to election forecasting. Kyle, appreciate a few minutes.
Thank you.
All right, Andrew, thank you. And when we come back, we'll take a look at past debates and show you how they could tell us a lot about what we could see tonight.